Good morning, everyone. Today's Wednesday, July 2nd, one day after Canada Day, and we're back with the Canadian Immigration Live Q&A. Today, it's only me and Alicia. Mark is gone for the last 3 days, I think, right? And yeah, so it's just two of us, and we're here to answer your questions. We'll wait for the people to pile in. And while we're waiting, Alicia, how are you doing?
Doing well, Igor. Yeah, we just had Canada Day, so it was a weird time because it's a Tuesday, so that was a bit odd. But yeah, we were able to get off to Canmore and we watched the parade. I've got nieces and a nephew that are in the Roundup band and then the Stampede band, so that was fun to watch them and some family in from out of town. So yeah, happy Canada Day to all.
Yeah. We went to downtown yesterday, just for like an hour and a half, and it was so hot for us. Like, we're so not used to the hot weather, and I had to cut my stay in downtown short because I had another review call with a client yesterday. Yes, sometimes we work on the weekends. And when I got on a call, I asked the client, like, what's the weather right now in Oman? And he's like, well, I don't know, it's like 40 plus. And I'm like, how do you guys even survive there? It's like it's 29 degrees in here, and he's like, "Are you serious? Like, I would be so jealous." And I wish it was like 29 degrees in Oman right now. It's only in winter that it gets so cold, and I'm like, "What do you mean cold?" So it's like this confusion, um, and it's so funny um, how sometimes the environment would change for people depending where they're from. So yeah, for those who want to come to Canada, you have to be prepared. Sometimes it gets cold. Sometimes it gets minus 40, but sometimes it gets cold plus 29 degrees. Depends on your perspective.
Yeah.
Okay, we will now transition to the next section of our live Q&A. Like, we have 48 people watching live. I assume more people will be piling in shortly. Um, But Alicia, before we actually go to the question, do you think there's anything that was happening in the last couple of days, or we're just waiting to see like what the government has to do with their new policies and approach to immigration?
Yeah, I mean, we are seeing, of course, the federal government passing some legislation to try to look at some larger infrastructure projects and nation building. We've been seeing some moves towards trying to reduce interprovincial trade barriers. So that's something that is happening where we're trying to get rid of unnecessary internal trade barriers within Canada, but between provinces and territories. So I think there's some positive momentum on those fronts. Um, there hasn't been a ton of immigration related news recently. There was a draw, so maybe we can talk about that. We can flip over and go take a look at the express entry rounds of invitation because that's something that's always on our minds. And I guess this is positive news, right? It's kind of slowly moving in a direction that's going to be useful to more people. So it's not a super recent draw, but it was June 26th, and it was a CEC draw, which was good news. We've not had very many CEC draws. It was a decent number in terms of the rounds of invitations, so 3,000 invitations went out. The CRS cutoff was 521, and when you take a look, so take a look at the tie-breaking rule on this one, November 21st, 2024. And so there have been a number of people who've been sitting in the pool hoping for an ITA at this 521. And so that tie-breaking rule does give you some information. It means that a lot of people have been waiting for a number of months because, of course, your express entry profile is only valid for a year. And so making sure that you keep that up to date. The other thing that I've noticed, I've heard some sad stories from people who, or I guess unfortunate stories from people who had a profile, they had a valid express entry profile, and they had a language test that was coming up for expiry. So either their CELPIP or their IELTS, or I guess technically a Pearson test, was expiring. and they didn't realize that they needed to go and get a new test and actually put in the new test number and the PIN and the language test results prior to their current test expiring. And if they didn't do that, so normally you can go in and you can update your profile, right? You can modify things, you can retransmit, you update your profile, and you keep your place in the queue. Well, the problem is if your language test expires, it's going to say your profile is ineligible. It kicks you out, and then you no longer maintain your place in the queue, and you actually have to start all over again from scratch and create a new profile. So I do want to send a warning out to people that if you've had your profile sitting in that Express Entry pool for a very long time and you're not keeping on top of your language test expiry, go back, take a look. What was the test date? So not even when it was issued to you, but what was the date that you sat the exam, and make sure that you go and get a new test taken and a new result before your current test expires. Update your profile while you still can, because if it actually is deemed ineligible, then you've got to start all over again and you lose your spot.
Yeah, I can help but mention this case that we had like last year when we were assisting a client with a PNP nomination, and the client's test was coming to an end, and he reached out to us saying, "Okay, my test is about to expire." We're saying like, "Okay, you need to take the new test and you need to update everyone." And so what he does, he updates the PNP, but he doesn't update the test in his Express Entry
No.
profile. And it is only through circumstances like this coincidence of fortunate events that he was able to save his PR application. But so be very careful. Like if there's more than one place where you have to update your language test, make sure you do that. All right. Okay, Alicia. So now we have 74 people, so I think we can slowly move on to the questions. For everyone who's watching live, please leave the questions in the chat. We'll try to answer as many of those as possible. We try to focus on the questions that are more generic and would be beneficial to everyone, rather than the questions that ask, should I, can I, what should I, have I done something correctly, have I not done something correctly, and so on. So if you have a case-specific question, we would direct you to our website, holthelaw.com, where you can click Speak to a Lawyer, and then you can select a time to connect with either Alicia, Mark, or I for consultation. All right. So on this note, Alicia, we'll move to the questions. We'll pull up the shoutouts first. So Anatoly says, Привет. That's in Russian language. Turning in from Toronto, wishing you a good Q&A live today. Thank you so much. Let's see, we have Batman wishing us a good Canada Day. Thank you so much. Let's see, do we have any more shoutouts? Yeah, we have Boomer, Elbow Dude, Mr. Byrne. Good morning to you as well. And then we have the questions that I'll start pulling up right now. So we'll start with the super chat. So Nash is asking the following. So he doesn't have a representative. It's been 2 weeks since he submitted his biometrics for Express Entry. He's confident that the information is correct, but cannot create an account on the application status tracker. And then he clarifies his question. He's asking, have you guys had any luck creating and using application status tracker accounts for your Express Entry clients? And how soon after biometrics were you able to access it? Alicia, let's answer this. And while you
Yeah.
do, I'll pull up our website just a little.
Okay. So Nash, it really, IRCC has been going through a whole bunch of different variations of how they roll out and process applications. And Express Entry was nice because it was pretty consistent for a long time, right? You go through that Express Entry application kind of portal, and theoretically, you should get your notifications within it. So you have your own GCKey secure account, you get your notifications directly to your email address. It gets more complicated if you have used a representative who was trying to access your account, or if you did it through their rep portal. Hopefully you did it through their rep portal if it was an authorized representative. But for a long time, there wasn't a ton of consistency in terms of like they had on the GCKey, it would say, so your express entry application, after you've submitted it, it'll give you a notification if you have a new message, right? So then you log on, you go check your new messages at the bottom, and then it'll tell you kind of your application. Have you passed biometric? Has eligibility been passed? Is there a security clearance? Kind of what general stage is it at? And then at the end, it'll say, okay, your application has been approved, and you'll get a notification for, I guess, depending on where you are, either a passport submission or you'll do an inside Canada confirmation of permanent residence, COPR landing. So I don't know about you, Igor, but I've kind of found that it's not updated well, right? So they don't really keep on track of updating your status. So even if you've done your biometrics, it might be weeks or it might be months before they actually show that your biometrics result is been approved or is eligible or is showing as passed. But that doesn't mean they're not processing your application. So sometimes we get cases where, so the way that we work is that we don't actually take over people's profiles. So people have to tell us what's been happening on their profile, right? So they will tell us, hey, I can't see anything. And then we'll have to figure out, is there an issue? Or is it just that the system is not updating the status? Because sometimes they will say, oh, all of a sudden I got everything approved and I got my confirmation letter, and they didn't get all the steps in the middle. It was just all at once. So that's kind of our experience, is that it's all over the place. Sometimes it does get updated. Sometimes I've had clients try to create these tracker accounts as well. Sometimes it won't link to the tracker account. Um, IRCC is looking out at rolling out a new profile, but they will only allow people to sign up for it if you've never had a profile before.
Yeah.
So we'll have to see how that plays out.
Yeah, I have my own views on the processing times. Like every time that I review whatever this application is, whether that's 6% entry or study permit or work permit or anything else or TRV, I once we submit an application, we'll go back to the client's summary of the application. I show them the application number, the biometrics number, if they pulled up the biometrics, their UCI, the temporary or the permanent one, and I tell them, you see this list with the checklist? Forget about it. Like, don't even look at it. it's like it's useless. It will not tell you in any degree of certainty where your application is at. It may remain unchanged like for months and months and months, and then all of a sudden it will change and say, yeah, your application is now approved. So don't even worry about that. I know some people are so anxious about the processing of their application, and I certainly understand that. I've been an immigrant myself. Um, there's what do you call it? IMM tracker website that allows you kind of like to track where your application is compared to others. And even on that website, sometimes you go and see that the application that was submitted like a month ago is now already approved, and the application that's been pending like for 6 months is just at the whatever random stage there is. um, and yeah, like just don't worry too much about it. I would say the best advice here is once you click the submit button, unless your situation requires you to monitor your status, renew your work permit, and so on, just forget about it. Like, forget that you ever applied for immigration and just keep monitoring your email. Make yourself a morning coffee, open your inbox, check if there's a new email, go every once in a while to your account, but don't look into the actual stages that you see there. And Alicia, speaking about the second question, have had any luck creating a status tracker? No, we did not have any luck, and the reason why is because we don't work with clients after the application is submitted as part of our initial representation model. So here, the reason why I pulled up the website is because you can read about how do we work. So we provide review services meaning that we work together hand in hand with you through the process of preparing and submitting your application, but you are the one who hits the submit button in your own RCC secure account, RCC portal, or PR portal, whatever that is. And only you will have access to your account. Only you will know what's happening. Only you will receive email communication from RCC. And yeah, so we don't continue monitoring our inbox because we're not representatives on file. So please go and take a look at how we work, and then you have some benefits of working with our firm. You can read what other people have to say, and I'll have to be honest, Alicia, I love this model that we have, and it looks like our clients are also enjoying this model, especially after hearing those horror stories when people would submit an application and their ghost consultant, or sometimes a regulated consultant, or I don't know, I don't want to focus only on consultants. Maybe there are some lawyers who are also the bad players. Sometimes they would come back and say, oh, you want access to your account? Pay me extra. It's impossible with our firm. It's just I cannot even think of a possibility how this would be possible, because we don't know your login, we don't know your password, we can go into anything without you.
Hmm. Yeah.
All right. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. And let's see, I'll give a couple more shout outs. So Joe says hello. Spider Man says hello again from Montreal. We do have one more super chat from Sam, so I'll pull this one up. What is the likelihood of restoring BNP quotas? Good question.
Yeah. So, and I think maybe we pulled this up last time, Igor, but we were talking about the Maritimes and what was going on with a little bit of a change in quotas based on whether the province can renegotiate with the federal government to say, okay, well, we're going to take a higher number of resettled refugees to make sure that our province is welcoming to resettling refugees. So that is what has happened, as far as I know, only in one circumstance recently.
Mm.
And so we shared that, I think it was last week that we talked about
Yeah,
that.
I'm trying to find it.
Hmm. And it's probably in the chat, Igor, if you go back to, because I think you sent it when we were going live last time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but other than that, so maybe it's possible. So maybe it's possible that there will be a slight increase in the number of PNP allocations that a province gets, depending on how they are negotiating and dealing with immigration on a larger scale. So it's possible. Um, yeah, so we saw that New Brunswick got, I think it was 1,500 extra
Yeah.
allocations.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so that was the news that they have increased because of the new agreement that was reached. And I think that was about a week and a bit ago, maybe.
Yeah, June
Um,
13th.
mhm. So it might happen. We have yet to see what will happen with further policy. Last week, we were also talking about the kind of the marching orders that were released from immigration about what they are going to be marking their progress against. And one of the things that they were talking about in terms of economic applications was the PNPs. And they were talking more about targeting the provincial nominee categories to occupations, sectors in demand, where the province forecasted a long-term need. And so it seems like they're using the PNPs in order to fill regional demands for occupations and for sectors where they have kind of chronic shortages.
Yeah. And let's see, Alicia, on this note, I will pull up the comment from Joe. I know it's a little bit outside of the order in which the questions were received, but Joe says, I have friends that have very high expression of interest score in Alberta PNP, as high as 81, but they don't get drawn as the AAIP draws are not more knock based. Unless your job is in demand, your expression of interest score won't matter, I guess. And this
And
is very, very reasonable comments based on what's happening.
And maybe, Igor, can you just go to the AAIP and go to applications in progress and just kind of see where we're at? Because this, Joe, that's a fair comment. And I think it's something that people need to take into account when they're creating their expressions of interest. And so Alberta has always said it doesn't have any way to vet your eligibility. So they just assume that people are going to create a profile, and if you're eligible, great. So you can see that we only have overall allocation for the whole year 4,875 spots. They have already issued over 2,500. There are over 2,500 applications sitting in the queue waiting to be processed. So
Mm,
basically, it means we're full, right?
yeah.
And there will be rolling intakes. But okay, and scroll up again, Igor. So if you look at the date the applications are being assessed, so if you look at rural renewal, you'll see that it was, I think, April 13th, 2024.
I'm trying to
Then
find.
yeah,
Uh,
if you look at AOS, they've got a currently assessing applications received November 21st,
mhm,
2024. Um, for applicants. So they're only assessing April for people that don't have a work permit, and then applications with a work permit expiring um, in 2025 or later, right? And then if you scroll down after rural renewal, you can see tourism and hospitality. They're currently assessing from December of last year. But here's where it changes. Dedicated healthcare, well, all of a sudden they're processing those applications, right? And
mhm.
so you can see there's only 91 applications to be processed, and they have spaces remaining 292, but they are actively working on getting those people nominations. If you look at the Alberta Express entry stream, also, they're not really pulling from that pool, right? They're not actively assessing those applications. And so it's interesting to see where the priorities are based on what they are processing. And they are processing healthcare, and that's almost it, right? Um, and then if you scroll down too, it'll give you the other entrepreneur streams. Um,
Which is also
and then
funny. Like they have 52, but the
yeah,
allocation is 17. So
yeah,
how many years it will take them to process these 52
yeah,
applications?
yeah.
This one
And
is
so
interesting.
yeah, and so we know there's thousands and thousands of people sitting in the pool, but there's no guarantee that if you created your profile, you're eligible. Or worse yet, if you thought you had points and you didn't, there's a real risk of misrepresentation. But the other thing that you can find on this website is what is the constellation of factors that they are drawing when they do a round of invitations. So when you look down, it'll actually give you information on the draws and who they picked and what the EOI score cutoff had to be, and what knock, did they have a job offer, was it through a dedicated healthcare pathway? Most of them are through a dedicated healthcare pathway. They've done small numbers of accelerated tech through Alberta Express Entry as well. But each of those has parameters in terms of what they look at when they do the draw. And Joe, you're right, it's not just a score, right? It's not if you have the higher score automatically is going to give you a notification of interest. It's not like Express Entry. So you have to just see, and even if you get a notification of interest to apply with Alberta, there's a bit of a delay, and you've got to go back to the website and see what were the constellation of factors that they picked, and are you sure that you're eligible before you click submit and you continue on to try to go and do that application. So you do have to be super careful.
Yeah. And like on this note, the score is perhaps the least important factor here. Like unless you actually work in the occupation that is in demand and the occupation that may get drawn in the future draws, then your score is relevant. Like and that's one of the downsides to the PNPs right now, Alicia, as I see it, because at least with Express Entry, you know what occupations are eligible for the categories. Here, no idea. Like agriculture, what not codes? Is it only butchers, or is it like farmers, or is it like heavy equipment operators that work in construction, or it's just the trade like plumbers or electricians? Like what fits into what category? Like what knock codes they focus on? Have no idea. And then what I what like sometimes it's just like crazy is that they would identify the category and say everyone except those people who work in major groups, this and this and that. And it's just like, how would you give advice to people whether they should put their eggs into this basket, or like they should focus on filling out other baskets, and working, for example, on French, and
Yeah,
trying to qualify for federal immigration programs. It's just
yeah.
impossible to predict. And
Well, so Alberta is harder than other provinces for sure.
mhm,
Some of the key factors that Alberta always looks at, and they've listed this on their website, is whether people have family members in Alberta, or it used to be anyways, and then whether they have a job offer. And so having an Alberta-based employer with a job offer is really a big factor if you don't happen to be in healthcare, right? So if
mhm,
you either kind of have the healthcare categories or, well, especially for healthcare, you have to have a job offer as well, but also for other occupations, you might have a chance if you have a solid job offer and if the province can kind of tailor it to say, oh, we really need people in these areas that have job offers. Other provinces are better. Other provinces are a little bit more transparent in terms of the way they do their scores and their ranking system. So there's a little bit more certainty. And I did see too a note about OINP, a couple OINPs, and do take an take note of the new ONP portal, and that just launched today. So maybe Igor, you can also flip
yeah,
over to the OINP page, and it's important to go through and I haven't done this yet, but read the user guide in detail. So what has basically happened is Ontario hasn't been doing draws because they wanted to change everything over to a new portal, and I'm assuming it's because they want to have tighter control in terms of what's going on with employers, and they want to make sure that if employers are submitting support for an application under OINP, under the employer streams, that it is actually the employer. There's not ghost consultants, there's not fraud happening through third parties. They want to make sure that these are legitimate offers. Because things have been backlogged for so long, they want to make sure employers still have a valid job offer for that position, for that employee, that the terms of employment are still correct. And so as of today, today's the new day that they have to go back, start all over again, register that employer profile, submit the job offer, make sure they have that My Ontario account, make sure, and this is also a way to vet companies, right? To make sure that the company has a valid business license, to make sure that they've filed their corporate tax returns, they've got active business numbers, they don't have employment standards codes violations, they don't have kind of workers' compensation issues. So this is another way just to kind of clear house a little bit and to start all over again.
yeah. Alicia, as we discuss PNPs heavily right now, I also want to pull up this comment from Nash. We're going back to Alberta. That AAP has also started releasing details on what exactly um, were the requirements for the draw, right? So what Nash is talking about here is this section, right? So the draw information for 2025 is in here. So that's the only things you see. But then when you go to 2024, then you see a little bit more about what were the factors in each draw. Do you have any guess, Alicia, why they would stop releasing this information?
And that's a good point, Nash. Like I did not realize that they're no longer making it available to say what it is on the draw parameters. Um, I'm assuming that they're trying to keep their cards close to their chest and they just don't want to say what it was that they were pulling. Maybe they will give you like a year-end review, like maybe they're just now aggregating this information and they won't release it till the end of 2025. But that's a good point and good observation, and it's a decent thing to ask to AAIP. So there's a comment section or kind of contact us on the AAIP website. And I think it would be fair for people to say, hey, it would be helpful for us to understand what the draw parameters are for transparency and so that we can plan our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I'd encourage you to send them a note.
Sorry, I'll just have to move here. Okay, to the screen. Okay. Um, let's move on a little bit. So we have quite a few questions piled up. People become a little more active now. So I'm just going to unselect the questions that we've already answered. And I will pull up with this one. So Vijay says, hello, Igor and Alicia. I'm on a closed work permit and I wanted to see if a new work permit application is required if there was a reduction in my pay. So the employer is trying to rehire me after a layoff on a new closed work permit.
So, Vijay, again, so Igor and I are both immigration lawyers, and we try to, for free, answer general immigration questions in this live stream. We cannot give you specific legal advice unless you book a consultation. And the reason that we ask you to book a paid consultation is because there's no way we can be professional and get all the information in a couple sentences on a screen. And so we really need to know what kind of work permit. So what kind of closed work permit was it? Was it LMIA based? So did the employer have a labor market impact assessment for your position for a specific knock and pay? Were you under an intercompany transfer? Were you under a free trade? Were you under mobilité francophone on a closed work permit? We really need to know what kind of closed work permit you're on, because in any of those scenarios, whether it's under the Temporary Foreign Worker Program under an LMIA, or whether you're under the International Mobility Program, so those are the LMIA exemptions, but they do still require an employer portal offer. And in either scenario, your employer would have had to say, this is the person, right? So they name you as a worker, they put in your occupation, and they put in your NOC code, your job title, your pay, and your hours. And if any of those things have changed, then almost always the employer needs to go back and they either need to do a new employer portal offer and then resubmit it, and you need to do a change in your work permit. And there is sometimes the ability to get interim authorization to work in the new job, but you have to actually submit that request and wait for the email back from IRCC. Or worse yet, if it is an LMIA situation, then the employer might have to all go back, re-advertise, resubmit a new LMIA, wait for the LMIA, and then you change your work permit to the new work permit. In any case, they will need to notify either ESDC or IRCC through the employer portal about a material change or a change in circumstances. In some cases, it really depends on how much they're changing your pay by. Is there a collective bargaining agreement? Is there some sort of reason why there's a pay reduction? Um, but in most cases, the government will come back and say, well, you've changed the conditions of employment, and therefore you need to get a new authorization to employ this person at different conditions. But please reach out, book a consult, and we'll get more information so we can give you some specific advice on what to do.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the next question, and this one is good. Question from Noman. I'm currently in Canada on a postgrad work permit, and my spouse is a Canadian citizen, but she's living abroad, or he, right now, like we don't know. What's the general process to apply for permanent residence through spousal sponsorship in this case? And initially, like the first bell that rings in my head is your spouse is currently abroad. First, she's a Canadian citizen, which means that she can sponsor you even if she's currently living abroad, but she must demonstrate that there's an intent to return to live in Canada. So perhaps this is the most important aspect in here. And then, Alicia, we can discuss in a little bit more detail, like what are the requirements, right? Like what's the overall process?
Mm-hmm. And so, Noman, there's a couple things to try to sort out. One is, are you legally married? The other is, are you common law partners? Because if you're legally married, okay, great, then you have a definitive date of your relationship start. And as long as that relationship is not dissolved, as long as you're not legally separated or divorced, your Canadian citizen spouse could sponsor you. This is different than a PR. So be careful, make sure that your spouse is fully a Canadian citizen, because if your spouse is only a Canadian permanent resident, it is not possible for them to try to initiate a spousal sponsorship when they're not living in Canada. It is only sometimes possible, just like Igor said, if your spouse is a full Canadian citizen, but they have to demonstrate an intent to live in Canada. And so here's coming back to whether you're married or a common law partner. If you are only common law partners, so you're not legally married, but you've been cohabitating 12 months continuous in a spousal like relationship, then you got to start worrying a little bit about, are you maintaining that common law status? So if you have not yet hit a year, so 12 months continuous cohabitation, you may have a you may not be eligible to be sponsored, right? If you haven't fully hit that year already. Even if you have hit that year already, but there's been a breakup or a break in the relationship, so one of you has had another partner, if you've had an affair, that can actually end that common law relationship as well, according to IRCC. So be careful on whether you're common law. And then also, if your spouse is a Canadian citizen living abroad, you still have to maintain that relationship. You've got to show evidence that you are still in a committed relationship and it is a bona fide relationship under Section 4.
Hmm.
And then, yeah, just like Igor said, that intention that by the time that you are going to be coming to Canada, the two of you will be living in Canada. So what has the spouse set up? Does your Canadian spouse have a social insurance number? Have they lived in Canada before? Do they have Canadian bank accounts? Do you have somewhere where you can rent or live in Canada? Do you have a job? Does your spouse have a job lined up? How are you going to support yourself? So these are all things that immigration wants some evidence of.
And Alicia, here, I wanted to mention like we work with many US clients who have been living in states like for 20, 30 years, and then they want to retire completely and just live a peaceful life here in Canada up north. Perhaps they have some property, but they don't have an actual stable income. They were just living off their savings, and that could be another challenge that you have to address in your application because, as you can see in here, there is no minimum necessary income requirement that your sponsor, your Canadian spouse, needs to meet, but the sponsor needs to show that they have the minimum income requirement for sponsoring a dependent child, and even for sponsoring a spouse. The sponsor needs to show that they are capable of financially supporting you in Canada because they sign an undertaking, right? They take this promise that they will support you for 3 years and recover all of the expense, like all of the costs if you go on welfare, essentially here in Canada, and that undertaking is for 3 years. And so the
And
government
it
wants to see, yeah, like that your spouse actually can support you, that you're not coming here just to live off the taxpayers' money.
Yeah, and that undertaking runs from the date of permanent residency. So we know
Mm-hmm.
that most applications, and inside Canada applications taking a year, outside Canada is taking probably close to 2 years. So 2 years plus 3 years on top of that, that's how long that undertaking is running.
Yeah.
So Igor is totally right. There's an exception from the low income cutoff guidelines. So your Canadian spouse doesn't have to actually prove LECO, but there is what's called financial inadmissibility under Section 39 of the Act, of the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. And this is where, just like Igor was saying, if the government or the officer reviewing your file doesn't believe that the two of you have enough money to support yourselves without going on social assistance, then they can actually say it's inadmissible for financial reasons. So it is something you've got to watch out for.
Yeah. Um, I found a really interesting question that I probably want to pull up in here, and we can maybe discuss several questions on this topic. So I'll start with the question from Abhishek. Any thoughts on Francophone mobility program update from NCLC 5 to NCLC 7? I'm not sure um, where you find this update, Abhishek. Like right
I
now,
think Abhishek's maybe just asking. So.
okay, okay. Like hypothetically, is it possible that they will move it back to NCLC 7, right? What
Mhm.
do you think, Alicia? Do you think it's possible?
I think it's possible, but when we look at, so one of the things that came out in the operational plan, or I guess the overall plan that we were, I forget what they call it now, Igor, the plan we were looking at last week is what are our performance indicators and where do we want to go in terms of our immigration um, overall numbers and makeup of people coming in. And one of the key things was that because of the Official Languages Act, immigration has a target for increasing Francophones outside the province of Quebec.
Mm-hmm.
And because of that, and it's a pretty aggressive target, um, I'm suspecting that maybe they will keep it at the NCLC level 5 because it's a pipeline. It's a way for people to be able to continue to work while they kind of work towards their PR. It's possible they could revise it back down, that they could say, no, you know what, we've got too many overall temporary residents in total, and we're just going to make sure that that number goes down. But when we look at how aggressively the percentage is increasing in the Francophone categories, one of the ways that they can keep people here and promote permanent residence to Francophones is through that Francophone Mobilité work permit. And so maybe they will keep it at 5. And I haven't seen them revise it.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen any updates about, because it was a pilot program and it was technically set to expire in June. Um, I haven't seen anything yet, so we'll have to kind of stay tuned.
Yeah, and I'm like I wanted to add here, like we have to look at the trajectory, right? So the
Mhm.
trajectory is you can see it going upwards to 8.5% of the total number of admissions of francophones in Canada.
Mhm. Mhm.
The trajectory is that they moved backwards from NCLC 7 to NCLC 5, not the other way around. So um, answering your question, Abhishek, like I don't see that happening, to be honest. So to me, it looks like the trend on francophones will continue. Um, and on this note, Alicia, I wanted to pull up a few more questions that ask very related question, right? Like, do you think
Mhm.
there will be more French draws this year? Absolutely,
Yes.
absolutely. Perhaps we'll see more French draws than any other draws. At least that's how I see it. What do you think, Alicia?
Well, and keep in mind that it's not only French draws. So they are assessing the total number of francophones, but they have data we don't have.
Mm-hmm.
So they can look and see what are the language test scores for English and French from everybody who submitted a PR application.
Mm-hmm.
And they are pulling francophones from PNPs. They're pulling francophones when they do a CEC draw. They're pulling francophones when they do basically a targeted draw as well. So, but you can tell on the targeted draw because that's the parameter that's public. You can't tell on the CEC and you can't tell on the PNP. So they are pulling a number of francophones from different categories, and we can only really see it when they do a French category specific targeted round.
Yeah, and try to score a 521 without learning French. Just a hint, right? Like, it's so hard. Like, you have to be a superhuman to score a 521. I have no idea how people do it, like Alicia. You have to be under 30 years of age, highly educated, have foreign work experience, Canadian education. You have to have money, you have to have Canadian work experience. Like, how do you manage to accomplish all of this before you turn 30 and
And
start
if
losing?
you have a spouse, they have to be a
Uh-huh.
rock star too.
Yeah. So super hard, and most likely the people who received the invitation to apply in the recent draws, who have been waiting for the ITA for like a year, remember this tie-breaking rule, they most likely know some French, at least some French. So absolutely. Okay. Let's return back to the questions in the order that they were received. This one would be from Nifemi. So let's see. I had a continuous role that's permanent now, but it started as a temporary role. For the purposes of expert entry or PNP, can we start counting the period of employment from when the role started or when it became permanent? That's a very good question. And there's
Mhm.
a lot to talk about here.
And maybe, Igor, you can go and pull up the IRCC site that talks about eligibility for FSW and for CEC.
Mm-hmm.
Because Nifemi, the $1,000 question is, how many hours per week were you working and was it a high skilled knock?
Mm-hmm.
Right? Those are the questions. So if you were in a high skilled national occupation classification code job, and this is something that's important to really decide on and agree upon with your employer, what is your job title? What were the job duties? What were the activities of the lead statement? What were the substantial number of the bullet points? And does it line up with what you guys both think in terms of what knock? And a lot of times that's really hard because employers hire you, and they may not give you a job description at all. And so you're not even sure what knock is it. But in order to qualify for basically any sort of express entry or PNP, you've got to have a tier 0, 1, 2, or 3 as the second digit in your 5-digit knock code. So take a look at the second digit. That's what you're looking for. But assuming it is a high skilled knock, then the key thing is it under IRCC rules considered to be full-time employment? And what's the cutoff, Igor?
Under CC, under
Yeah.
FSW. Sorry, I was just reading through tons of questions, and for
Mhm.
FSW, that's 67 points. That's what you were asking?
Well, just like what's the cutoff for considered high full-time work in a high wage job?
Oh,
What's full-time?
30 hours. 30 hours.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's all about 30 hours. And so 30 hours is the cutoff for whether it's full-time or not. But you can get to that 30 hours in a few different ways.
Mm-hmm.
So the easiest way, the most straightforward way, is you work 30 hours every single week and you get paid for those 30 hours. Great, you're sure. And you have to do that for 52 weeks. The other way is, as a temporary worker, is adding up all your hours of work. And this also depends on whether it's CEC or FSW work. If you're inside Canada, then you can kind of add up different periods of high skilled work and squish them together and cobble them together. So if you look at that gray box that Igor's got pulled out, you see an equal amount of part-time work. So over a 24-month period, you can show you worked at least 15 hours every week, and it was a high-skilled job, and it adds up to the equivalent of 30 hours, 52 weeks. So what we don't know is how many hours did you work as a temp? And then when you went to full-time, when you went to permanent, hopefully it was also full-time. Hopefully it was also at least 30 hours a week. So those are the key questions.
And Alicia, here, couple of things I wanted to add as well. So first, you want to make sure that the PNP that you're talking about allows to include the part-time work experience, or it has to be a full-time work experience. And if it's only a full-time work experience that counts, then you start from the time when you switch to become full-time. For the express entry, typically what we do is we break down the employment in the employment history section into two parts. So we would split it like the part of your employment when you work part time would count as one, and then part when you work full time would count as two, and it would generate two upload spots for you to upload the reference letters. And the reason why is because we don't want the system to automatically calculate your because if you only list your work experience as a one entry, it would calculate and you have to enter how many hours you worked. You don't want to round up, right? You want to actually provide the hours that you worked. And if you say that you started working on January 1st and like 2023 and until now, and you only move to full time, let's say in 2024, then it will also include this other year that you worked as part time as a full time work experience if you put like more than 30 hours. So you don't want to misrepresent. So you want to be extremely careful with how you answer the questions there.
And
And your reference letter must also include the breakdown in how many hours you worked per week in what periods of the year. So if you read carefully through the instructions, they would say if you had more than one duty, not duty, but more than one job title, or you worked in various varying hours, your reference letter must address all of that in great detail and explain how your duties changed, moving from one role to another. And
yeah,
so, what people would say, oh, I started working in a hotel as a housekeeper, and then I was promoted to a housekeeping supervisor. And they would just give the reference letter that talks about just one job title. And guess what happens? Their application gets refused because they did not account for all occupations that the person had in that particular company. So
yeah.
be extremely careful. If you need any help, please reach out to us. And Alicia, another thing that I wanted to add here is extremely confusing. Is the recent experience that I had with one of our clients who received an ITA based on the educational category. And the problem was that that person, um, like calendar on a calendar basis, she did not work 1 year. full-time.
Mm.
She worked only part-time. But her hours were not adding up to, um, let's see. So she actually worked more than 15 hours. So sometimes she worked 17 hours or 18 hours. And if you add up her numbers, like her hours of work throughout the days, then it would add to um, more than 1560. But if you actually break down every
Mhm.
single day and include like the days off and vacation days, then she would not hit 1560. So the system here, it actually calculates not only the calendar duration of your of 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 your employment, but also the hours. And if the hours are like more than 15 like hours, let's say 18 hours, that it can round up the hours to meet 1560 requirement. And like I know I sound a lot like a little confusing, but like it's this concept that was a little bit shocking to us because up to a point we would believe that it's only either 30 or 15 and you cannot include more than 15, but the system thinks a little bit different, and it may issue you an ITA if you're not even eligible for one. So be very careful with that as well, how the system calculates your hours.
Yeah, and Nefemi's saying both were 30 hours as a temporary and
Mm.
permanent, so that's great. The other thing I would say, the caveat to all of this that we've been talking about is make sure that if you're looking at CEC, you cannot claim self-employed work. So if you're an independent contractor, you don't get any points for that. It's not considered Canadian high-skilled work. And also, if you were still a full-time student, you cannot claim any of that work experience. So if you were still a full-time student, you had a study permit and you are working under the study permit rules, you also cannot claim that as high-skilled work towards your 1 year requirement. So be careful about those things because that's also something that really trips people up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This question, Alicia, is a good one. Let me just pull it up. Um, okay. So Ugo's asking, does remote work experience for an employer outside Canada while studying in Canada counts towards CRS points under CEC and FSW? Ooh, that's a good one.
Sometimes, if you're very careful about how you claim it and how you explain it. Um, so it depends on whether you meet minimum program eligibility. So that was the website that Igor was pulling up. So you either have to meet minimum program eligibility for either FSW or CEC. If you don't have yet 1 year of Canadian high skilled work experience, given all the rules we just talked about, then you're looking at FSW. So then you've got to make sure you're meeting program eligibility for federal skilled worker. So program eligibility for federal skilled worker means that you have 1 year continuous in the same NOC. So it's not the same as CEC where you can kind of cut and paste different NOCs together. It has to be the same NOC. It has to be within the last 10 years. So 1 full year continuous, same NOC, 1,560 hours within the last 10 years that you're going to put as your primary occupation. Once you have that, you still also have to show that you're meeting the selection factor points. So 67 points is the pass mark out of the selection factor grid. Those are different points than the CRS points. They're the selection factor points. So when you are looking at minimum eligibility, you've got to meet all those things. But then after you've hit your minimum eligibility, you might be able to get more points for work experience that you can count as foreign work experience.
Mm-hmm. And Alicia, on this note, I wanted to share my screen and share the ATIP request that was submitted by one of our colleagues and shared just recently on the network. So what I'm talking about here is the question. Let's see. So the question is, principal applicant is claiming full-time Canadian work experience and full-time foreign work experience. Okay, so the foreign work experience overlaps with the Canadian work experience, and so my assumption would be that the foreign work experience was a remote work experience. So can this foreign work like can the actual applicant receive CRS points for this foreign work experience? Can it be included? Because there is this concept of work experience like in excess, right? Like you cannot work in multiple occupations. Let's say you work for one employer 30 hours and then you go and work night shift somewhere else for another 30 hours. And both of those work experiences are Canadian work experiences, right? So you cannot claim, you cannot accumulate your work experience faster in this way, right? But it's a little bit different when it's a foreign work experience and a Canadian work experience. And so here's the answer, and it's a really interesting one. So work in excess is specifically precluded in the context of selection grid points for work experience and federal skilled worker, and is also precluded in three different points in the express entry, since the work being performed is Canadian in one occupation and foreign in another, the work in excess provisions would not capture this scenario. So basically what the officer is saying here is that yes, you can work full-time in Canada and full-time outside Canada and claim points for both work experiences at the same time. And this is the strategy that we sometimes recommend to our clients who just lack foreign work experience. If they can find some work that can be done remotely online for a non-Canadian employer, then it may help them accumulate the missing foreign work experience. And so here's I think it's on the in this paragraph. Currently there is nothing precluding the ability to work both in Canada and abroad at the exact same time. What an officer can assess, however, is the genuineness of the work experience given the high number of working hours. This can be addressed by a procedural fairness letter, so a direct hint to it. The onus is on the applicant to provide sufficient documentation to satisfy an officer that they meet the requirements and that they were able to successfully perform the duties of the NOC in two concurrent full-time jobs. And I think here it was saying something that the legislation, how it was drafted, just did not account for this possibility, because it was drafted in a time when people would not work full-time remotely for some non-Canadian employer from inside Canada. So things might change in the future, in the nearest future, but for now, this is kind of like this little crack that you can use and actually obtain a little more points. All right. Alicia, let's move on to a couple more questions before we wrap this up. I know we sometimes would hang up on a question for a little too long and not address other good questions. But this one is from Tulipa. I just couldn't help but pull this up. Top of the morning to you, Igor and Alicia from Jamaica. Finally catching up with you. You deserve a gold medal for the free important educational information across the globe. Tulipa, there's a address on our website, and you can mail the golden medal. We would gladly accept it and demonstrate it on the new live Q&A next week, or in 2 weeks or 3 weeks, how long it takes to get that delivered. So thank you so much. Thank you. The next one would be from Taras. So I came to Canada under Canada-Ukraine Authorization for Emergency Travel Program, QUET, and I have been working in construction for 2.5 years as a fire stop installer and Zoom boom operator full-time. I'm planning to score 7 on English language test and improve it to 9 in the future. I have a master's degree. Would it be difficult to obtain a permanent residence? Do you think, Alicia, we have enough?
Um, and so to pack it, it's really hard to give an assessment without knowing all your circumstances. So I'd encourage you to book a consult with Igor. Igor is our resident QET expert, and he can likely talk to you in a language of your choice. He has those skills under his belt, but it's tough to be able to say unless we know more. Those all sound like positive things, right? You've got work permits, you've got work experience, you've got a master's degree, you're working on language. Hopefully, if you can hit that CLB 9, that does give you those compounding points when you're looking at the CRS points grid in the score. So it's difficult to say without knowing a whole bunch more about where you're at and what your best strategies are. But that's what we do, right? book a consult with Igor. We can talk about, do you have a really good chance at CEC, or should you be looking at maybe pivoting to try to look at one of the rural programs, or do you need to learn French, or do you have a spouse and what's going on with that? Do you have kids? How old are those kids? So those are all questions that we would normally ask, and things to explore to learn more.
Yeah, and for us, so here the important thing is um, with the CLB 7 in English, it's going to be extremely challenging, almost to a point of being impossible, right? At least right now, unless there is a large trades draw and you have a qualifying work experience that fits into one of the categories. When you improve to CLB 9, it becomes a little less impossible, but it's still very challenging. And so right now you need to figure some creative solutions that would help you stand out compared to others, tens of thousands of people who want to stay here in Canada, who have Canadian work experience. Many of them have Canadian education, and you just have to observe the CRS points and see what's happening. And right now the situation is very ugly, I'll have to admit. And most of the time, people would come to us, Alicia, with the last hope that we will give them this magic solution that doesn't exist. And sometimes we just say, look, there's nothing we can do unless you do something. And sometimes you need to learn French. Sometimes you need to go and study. Sometimes um, you need to switch your occupation to a different category. There are many different solutions, but most of the solutions that we offer right now are so um, are so unacceptable by people. I remember we went to do a presentation, in-person presentation in Lethbridge Park, and we gave the slide where we would explain that, look, the person who would have Canadian work experience or foreign work experience and a Canadian work experience, high level of education, good level of English, would have no problem immigrating to Canada in 2020. Absolutely no problem. I immigrated to Canada without having a single day of Canadian work experience and not knowing French, but those days are long gone. And if, let's say, in 2020 your chance would be close to 100%, now it's close to 0%, unless you do one of the solutions that we proposed. And the best solution that would elevate your points dramatically would be French. And guess what was the reaction of the people? They like, look, I've been trying to learn English for the last 5 years. My spouse is not willing to go and attend the English language classes. I cannot force him to do so. Now you're talking about French? Are you crazy? And that's the sentiment. So sometimes like people just they just cannot accept the new realities. And sometimes if that happens, then perhaps there are no options for you. So it really depends on what like at what length you're you're willing to go, and have this opportunity to remain in Canada. Some people are just not ready for it psychologically, but some
Yeah.
people, they have this first reaction, and it's like, you go through different stages of dealing with crises. Like your first reaction is like anger, and then it's denial, and then it's kind of like this acceptance, and then you realize, I still have some time on my co-ed work permit. I can extend my passport. I could do something, and perhaps if I do the set of right things, then in the next couple of years, I will have an option. And for some people who are not able to extend their work permits, there's still some solutions. And the worst solution that you can think of is just submitting an agency application or just a refugee application, just trying to do whatever it takes to remain in Canada. Sometimes that's the worst you can think of. And the best you can think of is leaving Canada instead, going to a French-speaking country, getting some French experience there, getting some language skills, and then perhaps complying with the conditions of your temporary stay in Canada and coming back here as a student, as a worker, or just try to wait for a better time somewhere outside Canada. What I wanted to say with this long speech is that you have to keep your eyes open. Don't get really discouraged with what's happening in immigration. It's not good. It's very, very ugly. But still, in the dark times, there is a possibility for some ray of light, and you just have to keep your mind open, and do the right things. Sometimes do some extra, just so that you stand out compared to other candidates.
And Igor, I know we're over time now, and I wanted to just jump to a couple questions quickly. So I see Robin, you've posted a lot of questions, the same question a lot of times. So
Mm-hmm.
Robin RJ, Mark and I did a whole podcast, and we actually did a video where we shared our screen and we went through and we did it all about certificates of qualifications, and we specifically did it with an example for cooks in BC. So
Mm-hmm.
please, please, please go to our website, go to our resources, go down to podcasts and look for the episode on express entry, getting it right, certificates of qualification. It was the first one that we did in our express entry series. And I would recommend that you actually watch it. So I think it's also posted on our YouTube channel as a video because it has a screen share of going through what does the certificate of qualification look like, what are you looking for in terms of how you put your express entry profile in there, what are the questions that you need to ask yourself to make sure that you are properly claiming those 50 points for a certificate of qualification. This is where you need to go. So please go and watch this, listen to it, and watch it. I would say watching it is going to be helpful for you because we do have a video with screen shares on that should be useful for you. And then the other one that I wanted to jump to really quick because I know we're in overtime here is Joseph, Joseph Ado. So Joseph was saying my work permit application was recently declined. I've submitted a request for reconsideration. How long does it usually take to get a response? Would you advise when to submit a reapplication while waiting for the reconsideration? No response. Joseph, take a look at Igor's post on our web page. So when you go through reconsiderations on our website, you will note, and we've talked about this many, many times, asking for reconsideration might never get a response, right? So the fact that you ask for reconsideration, it does not mean that IRCC is going to ever respond to you. So if you are thinking that you're going to stay in Canada, and again, this is risky, just like Igor said, your best option might be to leave depending on what's happened and have all the doors closed for you, but you don't want to be in an overstay situation. So if your work permit was refused, you might already be out of status and you might already be in overstay. And so it's very, very important if you have the ability to submit a restoration application, depending on the last time that you were in status. If it's been 90 days, within 90 days, make sure you do submit a restoration application. So I would definitely, definitely recommend reach out, book a consultation because this is a dicey situation and you never ever want to just rely on a reconsideration request. Probably nothing will happen, and if you've been refused, you are removable. So CBSA could literally come to your door, give you a Section 44 report, tell you you're inadmissible for overstay, and now you've got to get an authorization to return. You've got a mark against you in your immigration record for sure. So this is not a good situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Let's see, Alicia, do we have any other questions that we wanted to pull up before we wrap this up? Let's see. Okay, this one can be a good question. Does revised employer letter via web form being considered as negative from visa officer standpoint? Um, General comment, please.
So Prikshit, I'm not sure why you needed a revised employer letter.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends. Like, what kind of application? Did you do a PNP where you had to have an employer support? Did you do just a general express entry application? But if you were doing CEC, did you claim arranged employment points depending on how long ago it was? Because there are still reasons that arranged employment is important. And some of those have to do with whether you have to show settlement funds, and some of them have to do with whether you were actually invited under federal skilled worker for the selection points if you were looking at like a PNP application, for example. So we would need to know a whole bunch more about why do you need a revised employer letter? And whenever you look at any immigration application, whether it's PNP or some of the federal applications, it always says that the onus is on the applicant to notify them of any material changes in circumstances. And if you have a new job, if you have a new job title, if you have a different wage, if you've got different hours, if you have to go work at a different location of work, all of those things are usually material changes in circumstance, and you have a positive obligation to notify IRCC. So if things have changed, then yeah, submitting that web form is important so that you're meeting your obligation and you're not misrepresenting. But you also have to go back and double check, is that going to change any of my eligibility criteria for the category of application that I submitted? And is the change in my employment going to actually change my points for any of the categories? So these are things you've got to closely double check to make sure that it's not going to render you ineligible, or that you're not walking into misrepresentation, or you've lost your points and therefore are going to get refused.
Yeah. And Alicia, in circumstances when, let's say, someone would submit an employment reference letter that would not meet all of the essential requirements, let's say the employment reference letter would not talk about all the titles that the person had in the company and the duties that the person performed in each job title in a company. Would you say that revised letter would be taken negatively? Because my biggest worry here would be that the officer can say you've submitted an incomplete application.
Yeah.
And so it's not like how the officer perceives it, good or bad. It's just the officer may just simply say, well, you had more than one job title in this company. You should have submitted this with your initial application right from the start.
Yeah. So if you search completeness check and express entry, you can pull up the program delivery instructions, and it'll say, and Mark and Igor and I share this page all the time, what constitutes a proper employment reference letter. And there's a whole bunch of things. And so what Igor and I are always concerned about is, what did you submit on the first one, right? Did your initial application have a complete reference letter? Because if it didn't, and you're trying to chase it and update it now, maybe they will consider that. But in most cases, if you didn't have that when you submitted your application within your ITA period, if we're talking about CEC, then it might just be that they refuse the application for being incomplete in the first place. But you might as well try, right? If you realize that there's something a little bit off, you might as well try putting it in the web form and see what happens. But sometimes if an officer says it's an incomplete application, they're going to refuse it. You got to start all over again.
Mm-hmm. And then we'll finish with this comment, with this question from GM. If the position is given two different knock codes with different median wage, what factors do you need to determine the knock for use for application? Hope you can enlighten me on this concern.
And JM, this is something Mark and Igor and I talk about and do all the time. And so sometimes we'll literally sit down with clients and their employers and hash it out and say, okay, what knock? There's two different ones that could apply, especially in the tech realms. There's some that are very, very close. Software developers, software engineers, for example, that's one that's always a headache. But really, it's going back to, what are the activities of the lead statement? So that opening paragraph, what do you do? Do you meet all the activities of the lead statement? And then the next part is, do you meet a substantial number? So what they say is a substantial number of the bullet pointed may duties that do not start with the words may. So there's a bunch of bullet points. Some of them are optional, so they start with the words may, but all the other ones, you're going to hope that you're getting at least 75%. So we always say, we want to err on the side of caution. Make sure you're hitting at least 75% of those bullet point duties. The other thing that I always do with people, so we actually have a knock comparison chart. You can look through the accelerator course. We have a whole section on this because it's absolutely essential. But the other thing that I always do is a logic test. And so I talk to my client and I say, how many years of education do you have? How many years out of school are you? How many years of other work experience with other companies or this company do you have? And take a look at the wages. What are the wages? You mentioned that there's different median wages for this, because IRCC and the provinces are on the lookout for things that just smell of fraud. And so I've sometimes had people come to me and say, well, I'm a new grad. I basically have a 2-year post-secondary diploma, and they want to put me in a knock zero, right? I'm claiming this as a knock zero. My consultant told me to do that because it's on the list.
Mhm.
And instantly, I have concerns that that is all misrepresentation because it doesn't pass the sniff test. It doesn't pass the logic test that somebody with a 2-year post-secondary who doesn't have any other work experience is going to be hired directly into a knock zero role.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
logic tested as well.
And Alicia, here it's like it's always just one knock code that you have to come up with. Like
Correct.
you cannot say to the officer, it's either this or this, I don't know. Like you help me determine. No, the onus is on the applicant to satisfy the officer that the knock code you've selected, the one knock code, is the correct one. And there are many different ways how you do it. Like we will always focus on about 3/4 of the duties at least, um, to show that the knock is the correct one. We we do the comparison tables, right, between the knock and the reference letter. There's many ways how you can explain it to the officer, and it really comes down um, to how you present your arguments. If you just present the reference letter and just select the knock code in your online application system, that will not be sufficient for the officer sometimes. And the officer can also make a mistake. You have to be aware of that. The officers are human beings, and even artificial intelligence can also make a mistake. Trust me on that one. Just go to ChatGPT, fit in your reference letter, and just see what it gives you. Like, most likely, it will give you some absolutely random knock codes that have nothing to do with what you actually were doing. Sometimes it takes hours for us to research the knock code. Like, it's not easy. And sometimes we need to go back to the employer and say, look, the reference letter you gave is good, but it's just like it's so vague, it's so broad that it's impossible for us to identify the knock code. Perhaps you can phrase your reference letter a little bit differently, like not to create something non-existent, not to misrepresent, not to lie and say you did something when you didn't, but just rewording the letter. I had a guy whose application was refused just because he worked in an occupation that is so complex. Like he was actually, if I'm not mistaken, he was creating the manuals for operating the plane. Like, can you imagine? Like, you have a passenger plane and you have to write a manual, kind of like for a car, but that's like for this huge machine, you know. And in his work, he had to deal with so many different people. He had to look at the drawings, you know. He had to modify the drawings. He had to write the whatever technical texts, you know, for the manual. And it was just like a very broad occupation that he was performing. And sometimes like um, it's very hard to find a knock code. He found one, and that was correct, but the reference letter was just really bad. The reference letter was like negotiating with stakeholders. Who are the stakeholders? Negotiating about what? You know, and so sometimes you need to go into specifics of what you do. So JM, like same as with other viewers. If you have a very unique situation that you need to discuss, please book a consult because it really comes down to what you have and what you can obtain. And um, if you cannot obtain a new reference letter, then perhaps you need to explain to the officer. And this is where we can step in with our expertise and our experience, working in this field for years and years. So on this note, Alicia, we're 22 minutes in the overtime, but that's pretty common. Like we just love doing those live Q&As and answering the questions. Luckily, after the live Q&A, we have our team meeting, and sometimes we sacrifice the time with our team discussing some firm matters so that we can answer more questions and help people a little bit more. On that note, we will end this live Q&A. We'll see you again next week at the same time, 10 a.m. Mountain Daylight Time. For those who are not subscribed, please subscribe. Please hit the bell icon, whatever, so that you get a notification when we go live. But if you don't hit the bell notification, you can always come back here on Wednesdays at 10 a.m. And we'll see you next week. Okay?
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Igor.
Thank you. Bye bye.